For my print media interview, I spoke with Mr. Steve Moore of the Pottstown Mercury. Just a bit of background information about Mr. Moore. He attended Boston University, where he majored in journalism. And during his 4 years of undergraduate, he was working with the school newspaper, where he primarily covered the hockey team. He graduated in 2005 from Boston University, and only a week after graduation, he received a job offer at the Williamsport Sun-Gazette, where he worked until 2006. After that, he decided to go back to his hometown of Plymouth Whitemarsh and work in their daily newspaper. After that, he decided he wanted to try something a bit new in 2008, and he decided to go with a public relations agency. Something there didn't make him feel very comfortable. He didn't like working in cubicles or attending daily meetings, so that was when he sought after the Pottstown Mercury, where today he's a current employee. There are two primary target audiences for Mr. Moore's articles, the first being an older audience. They have been subscribed to the newspaper for a number of years, so obviously they are very loyal, and they like the information they get to come as cold, hard facts. The second audience is a younger one. They like their information to come in the form of opinions, and based on those opinions, they like to engage in debates. And that information they obtain typically comes from online websites or blogs. In order to obtain the information necessary to publish these articles, typically journalists will attend the games, whether it be at the high school, collegiate, or professional level. And from start to finish, it can take an upwards of 4 hours to publish a full article. Before the game even begins, journalists will typically research the teams playing, and that can take about 30 minutes, and the information that they need to look up would be rosters, statistics, and key players. Next, they would obviously attend the game. That could take about 2 hours. After the game, the reporter will want to complete interviews, and that could be about 2 or 3, and that would take around 30 minutes. And a way to obtain great interviews would be to have a superior relationship with the head coach and their athletes. After all that information has been compiled, then you're going to want to put all of it into an article where you could have less than an hour to write it. And after the article has been written, then it heads off for immediate release. Regarding ethics, Mr. Moore provided me with an example. If he was waiting outside the locker room after a game and he happened to hear an argument between the coach and an athlete, then it would not be something he would report because it was meant to be in private and no one other than the team and Mr. Moore overheard it, so it's not something newsworthy. However, if this verbal altercation occurred on the field, then that would be something that the audience would be there to see and would be curious what went into this argument. So that would be something that Mr. Moore would want to report on. Same thing applies for college and professional sports. However, he believes that these athletes are held to a higher standard and that they put themselves in the public eye to be scrutinized. When reporting, if Mr. Moore is told something off the record or hears something through the grapevine, he must receive permission from that source in order to publish it into one of his articles. If this permission is not granted, he cannot publish this. However, if multiple sources go off the record saying the same thing without being provoked to state, then he can go to a third source and verify this claim. When I asked Mr. Moore if he ever had to report in a scandal, he said luckily he never has had to in his professional writing career, but in college while he was on their newspaper staff, the hockey team actually had an incident where a player was arrested at the bar. And after that occurred, it was very difficult to get information. Mr. Moore described it as interesting in order to obtain any information, which was very, very limited. And they actually had to end up pushing back their publishing dates because they didn't have enough information. When I spoke with Mr. Moore regarding the differences between covering a winning and a losing team, he said obviously it's a lot easier to cover information about a winning team because there's so much to cover and it's very easy to say good things about a team. The losing team, it's a lot more difficult because it's hard to obtain interviews and quotes from athletes afterwards, and he says that good quotes equal a good story. So obviously that makes it a little bit more difficult. And specifically for high school athletes, they're pretty awkward in front of the camera or if there's a microphone held up to their face. One example that Mr. Moore provided me with was when athletes are in front of the camera, that their friends might be in the background making funny faces or making jokes as they're on camera for an interview. So obviously they're not used to being in front of the camera and it's something very different to them. When it comes to high school students, you don't want to heavily critique an athlete, whether they dropped a pass or allowed the run that lost them the game. It's frowned upon in the print media world to critique these high school students because they are so young and they are in this sport for the love of the game. However, at the collegiate and professional levels, these individuals are in it for whether it be monetary gain or some form of scholarship. So in the words of Mr. Moore, criticize and have at it. This concludes my presentation on my interview with Mr. Steve Moore.